I think it works. I'm recording. Yeah, it works now. Super sorry for this.
Thank you so much, Annie.
Yeah, so I hope so. I will say that is correct. It's helpful. I think any case study of social media archiving to help with any kind of social media archiving, but not all platforms are created equal. So I think one big difference is user expectation. So on Twitter, for example, most people kind of understand that they're tweeting to the wider world and to the public. They're not usually tweeting very personal things they expect to stay private. I mean, some people do, obviously. Whereas in a WhatsApp message, or I guess a Telegram message, you expect that to be a much more private conversation. Facebook is similar. People, because they often share information only with friends rather than the public, they expect that to be a bit more private. So that's why I think Facebook has been more problematic in the issues with the data breach with Cambridge Analytica. But yeah, so I will actually get to the point and actually give my slides, and I'm happy to follow up on any of these details. It is a very complex area of work, and the more you know, the more you realize you don't know. So I'm sure at the end of this project, Terrace, and with the other initiatives you have, you will know a lot more than other people have doing this for years. So a little bit about me, just because I think it can be helpful. As I said, this is a very complex area, a lot of different types of social media archiving. So I think it can help to know who you're listening to. So as Ani said, I'm the digital archivist at the University of Edinburgh. So my primary responsibility is the corporate record of the university and special collections that are donated to the university, such as oral history recordings. But I then also advise on digital preservation across the library, and really there's no other person, staff member with digital preservation in their job description. So I actually increasingly provide advice in digital preservation across the library and the wider university, including sort of researchers and individual colleges and schools, which means that I come across needs for archiving web and social media in many different forms. So I'd say I know a lot about archiving social media in a lot of ways, but not a huge amount about how to archive social media in any one way. I also am the co-investigator for the Archive of Tomorrow project, and that is led by the UK Web Archive, which is a legal deposit web archive, which has very specific legal regulations and methods around it, but I'll talk a little bit more about that later. And in my previous role at the Digital Preservation Coalition, I was a researcher, so not a practitioner. So I wasn't archiving social media except to test tools, but I was supporting lots of different organizations do their own social media archiving. I've also done training in beginner methods. So a lot of the work I've done, for instance, with the International Internet Preservation Consortium, or IIPC, if you've not come across them, you're nodding, so I'm guessing you've come across them before. So I helped develop their beginner trainings. It's really about introductory methods and introducing people to the main concepts. And then I also reconvened and ran the Web Archiving and Preservation Working Group, and still sit on that steering committee. And I would say what the Web Archiving and Preservation Working Group does that's different from the IIPC is our focus is smaller organizations. So the IIPC tends to be big national libraries that have big national or even international scope for their collections. They're funded just to do web and social media archiving. Whereas this group really looks at all the other organizations that maybe collect lots of different types of things, and web and social media is just part of that. And they don't necessarily have the infrastructure to have a massive web archiving program like some of the national institutions. So it's slightly oversimplifying it, but just to give you an idea. So I think the first place to start, even though you already know that you're archiving social media and you plan to continue, I think it's really important to define really well why you archive social media and how to communicate the importance of that to other people and to other communities. So there are lots of different motivations for archiving social media. Basically any reason that you would archive anything, it's even doubly important for that reason to archive social media. So it might be for political movements and activism. I think this is very important because Collecting institutions tend to not collect in these areas very well. To keep governments accountable and to keep corporations accountable for the things that they communicate in social media. Increasingly, research funders require that researchers archive their research data, including social media, to support scholarly citation, because social media is increasingly used in scholarship and in research. For reproducibility and reuse of those research outputs, if social media is collected for research, to be able to make that reusable. And also for personal and community digital archiving, to keep a record of a community, of someone's personal activities, sort of on the personal scale or on a smaller scale. Ultimately, the web, including social media, is the record of the 21st century, as you are discovering with the war in Ukraine and other major world events. A lot of what we know about how people have responded and what their experience is on social media. So it's such a valuable, critical resource. And another reason to archive social media is that the social media platforms are not archiving this data. They do not have a legal mandate to archive the data that you create on their platforms. And in fact, most of them have user agreements that you kind of agree when you sign up for an account that says they will not keep your data and that they have the right to delete it. And there are lots of examples of user data being deleted, such as GeoCities by Yahoo in 2009, TwitPic, which I dearly miss, which was shut down or taken over by Twitter in 2014. And then in 2019, when Flickr restricted free storage, so unless people upgraded, they lost access to loads of images. And social media archiving is not, as I mentioned, can look quite different. So not everybody does it the same for the same reasons. So I've condensed a very complicated, complex field of work into a few categories, but just to sort of explain what I mean. So a lot of social media that's been captured sits in research data sets. So these are typically researchers using computational methods who want to do high-level sort of network analysis or sentiment analysis, and they want large data sets to machine-readable data to analyze. And that data tends to be collected with very specific parameters just to that researcher's question. So as I mentioned, one of my remits is corporate records, and social media absolutely falls into a lot of the regulatory compliance for corporations, for institutions, and definitely provides a really rich corporate history. Culture and heritage organizations often archive social media in order to document a major event or a place or a community or a topic. For social activism or community archiving, this is often social media that is captured in a not outside the context of an institution, often done by non-professionals. So of course that looks quite different to what you're going to get from a culture and heritage institution. And then slowly but surely, people realizing they need to do some personal digital archiving, sort of downloading and preserving their own social media data. That one's less common, but we're working on it. So the reason, and then there are not only lots of different ways of, lots of different reasons to collect social media, but lots of different tools and methods to go about capturing it that create very different types of social media archives. So one of the most popular, especially among researchers, is API harvesting. Just noting that that is only available for platforms that provide an open API or an API at all, and is limited to the types of data that they will share through their API. And ways of going about doing API harvesting might include programmatic harvesting, just writing some scripts to go request data from an API, such as Twitter's or Instagram's. Open source tools that do the same thing but have a user interface. That is mainly how I would collect via API. There are plenty of service providers now that, so service models supported by IT. So that's an internal service that an IT department might do some of this programmatic harvesting and then create a user interface or some kind of system over the top of it. There are now lots of subscription services or vendors that will do social media archiving. So in the UK, we have a company called MirrorWeb, Archivit, run by Internet Archivists and social media archiving. So you can pay somebody else to do it. And then if you have the credentials for the account, you are the account holder, lots of platforms have a sort of download your data functionality. So you can download your social media data directly from the platform, and that usually also utilizes their APIs. So you can also take a web archiving approach. So this does not get you the underlying data directly from the platform. It will give you data, but not machine readable in quite the same way. But what this gives you looks like more traditional web archives and is more about the look and the feel of that platform, typically from a browser. There aren't very many web archiving tools, for instance, that support sort of mobile device archiving. So you might be able to partner with a national or large scale program that's doing social media archiving. They might be capturing social media because it's in scope for their collecting. A really popular web archiving approach for social media is sort of do-it-yourself with Web Recorder. And Web Recorder is a project. It actually has lots of tools, which I'll talk more about in a moment. But their main capture tool is archiveweb.page. And then you might use other crawler-based tools. I have listed that because it's possible to use a traditional web archive crawler like Browsertrix, but it typically does not really get the results that you're looking for, but it is possible to use that. So if you want some specific tools, the first place I would send you, if you have not already stumbled across this, is the IIPC's awesome web archiving list, and they've broken down tools on this list via function. It will take you more than an afternoon to look through all of these tools, so lots of options. And if you still don't find what you need, I would point you to the Document the Now project, which I haven't come across them. I definitely recommend getting in touch. They're based in the States. And their tools are based really only at Twitter, but they have been designed to put in the hands of activists and members of the community. So their tools are designed not necessarily to be used by professionals, but much sort of lower barrier to use, fewer skills required. But they've got quite a few tools now for capturing social media, specifically Twitter, and archiving it. So the reason I go through all of this and talk about what social media archiving might look like and how different it can be and how many different tools there are is because it really matters why you are collecting social media when you're trying to choose how to do social media archiving. So there's no one way to do social media archiving, and the best way to choose is to understand what your needs are. So do not take this as gospel. This is just my sort of general impression of trends. So for research data sets, people tend to use just their own programmatic harvesting. Most researchers interested in social media have the skills that they need to go harvest data from platforms themselves, or they might use an open source tool that has a user interface. Corporate records in the corporate setting is the biggest use case for these subscription services and paying somebody else to do it, because often these subscription services are also set up to comply with relevant regulations, etc. So this is really just to show that different types of approaches work different for different motivations for archiving social media. And answering that question of why you are archiving that social media, and not just sort of thinking it to yourself, but documenting it really well, getting it in a policy, and describing who you are archiving that for, who your users will be, who you want to be able to use and find this data in the future, really will help you answer all of these other questions. So if you know why you're archiving this data, it's easier to choose content and to find those creators who are most relevant to the collection that you're building. If you know who you're collecting for, that can really help you decide an access strategy and decide what preservation format you're going to use, or how much metadata you need to create, because different users will expect to access things in different formats. So for example, you mentioned about being able to redisplay this Telegram data in the future. For most general users, they will see, oh, a Telegram archive, and they'll expect it to kind of look like Telegram. Whereas researchers interested in the underlying data, they just want a spreadsheet or some data in JSON or something. So understanding who might use that data in the future is really important to building the rest of your workflow. So very basic general social media archiving workflow typically looks something like this, and it's very similar for web archiving as well, where it starts with identifying the content that you want to archive, much harder than it sounds, selecting what's relevant, often from a huge amount of stuff, and then scoping it. So scope in social media and web archiving, it often is technical as well. So it means, for example, when you archive all of these posts, are you also going to archive any links that are embedded in those posts? If you are capturing a news media Twitter account, how often is that updated? How often do you need to capture this? Do you need to capture it every day? Do you need to capture every hour? Or is it sort of an institutional account and you only need to capture it maybe once every 6 months or something like that? And then the actual capture, I find, as long as your tools work, is very quick. If you're doing manual capture, obviously that can take much longer. But the vast majority of staff time in doing social media and web archiving is quality assurance, or QA. So that is checking that the tools have worked and checking that what has been captured is complete and up to standard. This is especially important in a field where the tools are still fairly new and still being developed. So you will inevitably discover some issues and have to go recapture or try to patch missing or broken content. And then if you have the luxury of having enough staff, you then describe these resources to try and make it easier for users to understand what is contained in this archive, and then so that's describe or to generate metadata, preserve it, which might for some actually just be depositing it with an institution, with a repository that specializes in preservation or supports preservation. And then actually with social media, I think the trickiest bit is then sharing or managing access. So I think you'll find a lot more preserved social media than you will find shared social media. But a responsive social media archiving workflow for a situation that is evolving particularly quickly, or you have reason to believe that the content will disappear really quickly, looks more like this. So you're going to spend more of your time trying to identify resources, less of your time scoping, a great deal more of your time actually just capturing things before they disappear. So you'll probably spend less time at this point worrying about the details of a long-term preservation strategy or the details about how you might share something in the future. And this is a little bit of an opinion entering into this. I don't think worrying about access and rights issues should stop you from collecting the content because it will be too late. So we don't have the luxury of sort of paper archiving where it can just sit there for a while we all talk about it. In social media, this stuff is deliberately deleted or lost. So this capture bit section of the workflow really is very important and is likely to take up the most time. So as a result, and that's sort of what this presentation focuses on, realizing that the other parts of the workflow are very important. Obviously, if you capture all this really important content, you want to know that it's preserved, you want to know that you can share it. But I think the immediate concern really is capture, mainly for that reason that a lot of responsive social media is responsive because the situation is evolving very quickly. And there's an expectation of rapid obsolescence, that things will disappear quickly as well. So the main strategies that I personally use when doing more responsive or active or proactive social media archiving or web archiving, the first thing I do is I check other web archives. So I have a look to see if somebody else has possibly already archived it to sort of save me a bit of time. And then there are some instances where you can ask a bigger web archive that specializes in web archiving to do it for you. This is less, these two first options are more likely to support traditional websites and less likely for social media, but it's still worth checking. So after that, because you can get started really quickly, I would probably do a manual capture with Web Recorder. If there is an open API, I would harvest the actual machine readable data straight from the platform. Personally, probably using an open source tool if it existed that has a user interface. I'm not a programmer. And if I had a relationship with the account owner, I would pursue having them download the data directly from the platform. This helps also sort of with rights issues and resharing on platform licenses. I'll talk a little bit more about that later. So for checking other websites, if you've not already come across it, the Sucho, or Saving Ukrainian Cultural Heritage Online, for this project in particular, documenting the war in Ukraine, I would definitely get in touch with them. I think especially if you are looking for support in preservation, or you want to deposit this alongside lots of other Ukrainian digital heritage, they might be able to support. I know that Internet Archive is supporting this project with access to their web archiving tools, but there may be other organizations who are supporting with social media, sort of sophisticated social media programs and tools and systems. So that would be definitely a first port of call. If you want to just check and see if other web archives have social media, I would recommend using Time Travel by Memento. So this will allow you to search for a URL. So you just put the URL for that sort of Twitter page or Facebook page or whatever it is. Probably not that helpful for WhatsApp or Telegram, but into this search engine, and it will search hundreds of web archives and let you know if anybody holds that. Just because a web archive has something doesn't mean it has a good copy. So you definitely always want to follow up and check that what they have archived vaguely resembles what it is that you want to capture. The Internet Archive is the largest web archive in the world. So if you sort of just want to skip Memento, go straight to Internet Archive, you can search the Wayback Machine. And the benefit of using the Wayback Machine by Internet Archive is they also have the Save Page Now functionality, where it lets you add a website, a social media page to the archive if it doesn't already exist. So Internet Archive does use crawlers. It does actually crawl the internet, crawl the web, but it does have some really sophisticated tooling that is now better at capturing social media pages than it used to. So this is actually worth it. So as I mentioned, if a web archive doesn't already have what you're looking for, or it doesn't have a very good copy, I would recommend manually capturing that web page with Web Recorder. Web Recorder used to be the sort of underpinning tool for a service called Conifer. I don't know if you've come across that before, but it's run by Rhizome, which is a digital art organization based in New York City. But Web Recorder has gone out on its own and now has lots of different tools. So archiveweb.page is for capture. Replayweb.page replays work files or waxy files, which is what archiveweb.page creates. Replayweb.page will also replay any work file or any waxy file that was created using any kind of web archiving tool. And BrowserTricks is its semi-automated version of archiveweb.page. I have not tested BrowserTricks on social media, so I don't know how well it works for social media, but I do know it's very successful with more traditional websites. So there are some great tools out there, command line only, for harvesting machine readable data, because Twitter is a less controversial platform to archive from. partially because it's in these nice little contained units, just a tweet, and also because there's slightly less of an expectation of privacy. It is probably the most popular platform for harvesting data. Twerk is a Python-based tool that was developed by the Document the Now project that I mentioned earlier. And while it's command line only, they also will hold your hand the whole way through using this tool. And there's also an open source system called Social Feed Manager. This is typically run as a service by an IT department. It's a bit more complex, but Social Feed Manager does allow you to set up and curate archives of social media from several different social media platforms, including Twitter, Tumblr, Cinewebo, Flickr, but they also are always adding new social media platforms to that. So definitely worth getting in touch with them as well. And then a tool that I often demo, and I'm happy to go into more detail in later, is tags. So this is for Twitter and is an API harvesting tool using Google Sheets. So as long as you have a Twitter account and a Google account, you can use tags. And it can either be used to do a one-off collection, or you can set it up sort of every hour, go and check a hashtag or an account for new content. So it's very useful, so you don't have to keep manually going and requesting data. So another great option, if you have a relationship with the account owner, is to download your data directly from the platform. So just in keeping with the theme, this is Twitter, but Facebook has this option. Most Google services have this option. And I think, I didn't look into too much detail, but I think Telegram allows users to download all of their data as well to have a local copy. So when you download an archive of your data, Twitter asks you basically to go request that archive. Because they're pulling from their API, it does take them a little bit of time, sort of an hour or so to process, I guess, depending on how much you tweet. And you get something that looks like this. So you see in the top screenshot, that local data, which is actually the JSON that has the tweet content, any photos, videos, mentions, as well as all of the metadata. So lots of information about the user who tweeted and any users who responded or retweeted to those tweets as well. And I'll show that in a bit more detail as well. And Twitter also provides this little interface that's constantly changing, but this is what it looked like not too long ago, that allows you to do a little bit of high-level analysis of your own Twitter archive, which I find probably more exciting than I should. Right, so just a few examples of responsive web archiving that I have been involved in. And so the main one and the most recent would be the social media and web content that came through the University of Edinburgh's Collecting COVID-19 initiative. So we collected this information via web form. And the way we collected web content was simply for people to list the URLs, even if that was Twitter, to give the URL to those posts or to that account. And to make sure we were confident we could preserve this data and make it accessible as a collection, we did require the submission agreement that asked users to explain what the rights issues were and to hand over so the rights to us to archive it and make it accessible. That did not stop people from submitting very problematic things that there is no way we will be able to make accessible in a straightforward way. But that was sort of our best attempt at trying to regulate some of the rights issues. Alongside all of the social media and web content that university staff and researchers submitted, we also did selective web and social media archiving, actually going out and researching and finding the different social media channels and websites where the university was communicating its response to lockdown and to COVID-19. And we kept these in a handy spreadsheet. And the main approach we have for the websites is a partnership with the UK Web Archive. They, as I mentioned, are a legal deposit web archive. So they're archiving our websites anyway. So we thought we would partner with them just to make sure we had good copies of all of the pages included in our COVID collection. As mentioned, the UK Web Archive, which uses crawlers, traditional web archiving tools, it doesn't always perform very well when trying to capture social media or interactive content. So we use Web Recorder to do manual crawls of more complex content. And this is just one example. The chaplaincy at the University of Edinburgh ran a podcast throughout the lockdowns called Let's Talk, and it is actually hosted on Anchor by Spotify. So what you see at the top is what the UK Web Archive was able to capture, even when throwing all of our best tricks at it. And what you see below, so you can see this little icon in the top left, that is what Web Recorder was able to get. We had a fully successful capture using archiveweb.page. So if you want to read more about that or how we made decisions about collecting and how we collected, there's a blog post on the UK Web Archive blog about that. Another project I mentioned at the beginning, which is also kind of crisis collecting, problematic for other reasons, is the Archive of Tomorrow project. Again, this is a UK Web Archive run project. So we are building a collection of websites and social media about health information and misinformation on the web. And one of the main objectives of this project is to ensure that we're capturing sort of discourse around COVID, around related health issues. So from places like Reddit and Mumsnet and resources that are not traditionally captured by national web archives. And we're also exploring how to use sort of curatorial methods, how to present these collections that likely or definitely contain misinformation or disinformation. So that has been a very hot topic. We've just started, the project launched in February, and we've had one workshop so far, and we'll have another in October. I've put the web archivist looking after this project for us is Alice. So if you have any questions about this, she is the one doing the actual curatorial work and the collecting. So she'll definitely be in a better position to answer specific questions. And we have officially launched a discourse forum, so we can share what we're doing in the project, as well as hear from other people that are doing similar types of web and social media archiving, dealing with issues of presenting misinformation or difficult information. So if you go to ukwa.discourse.group, there's nothing there at the moment because it literally, we just got this platform yesterday. But if you watch this space over the coming weeks, we would really welcome your sort of feedback on the work that you're doing and any questions that you have. So my recommendations, as quickly as I can, is to keep it simple. And when you're facing a really big challenge trying to archive quite a huge amount of stuff from lots of different sources, is to teach the community how to use the tools. There are tools out there for that. Make it easy for the public to submit the content they think is relevant and important, whether that's specific accounts or hashtags or posts. And do whatever you can to control that metadata, because it will help you later. So trying, to the best of your ability to get the name of whoever is submitting something or suggesting it, the date that something was created, and also the date something was submitted, what the ownership situation is, what the personal data issues might be, and to really push people to describe what the value or significance of that thing is and why they want it archived. Store that, this is sort of digital preservation in a nutshell. Store that content in 2 locations on different forms of storage. So what I would do is keep a copy on a local hard drive and also store it in a cloud service. And where possible, assign checksums at the file level to make sure that you can demonstrate that data integrity and that you know yourself if something has gone wrong with your files, if data has accidentally been damaged or changed. And a really good tool that you can get started with quickly is Checksum by Cores. And that link is actually to a DPC tutorial on how to download and use Cores. Best effort, again, where possible, to document the method of capture. So understanding what tool was used and what version of the tool is incredibly important for being able to make that accessible in the future. So whether you use something like Twerk or Web Recorder, and then also if you do any curatorial work to that data, so you clean it up or you delete fields, making sure that you're documenting what you're doing. And the same with decision-making. One question that a lot of researchers have that make it difficult for them to reuse social media data is they don't know why something was archived or why certain tweets might be missing. So if you don't document these decisions, it can be very difficult for researchers to know the provenance of something and to be able to explain any bias or problems with the data. There's a really supportive community around this as well. So if you haven't already gotten in touch with all of these different groups, I definitely recommend getting in touch with IIPC, with DPC. The Internet Archive has always been such a strong partner in sort of new methods in archiving web and social media data. Document the Now has a Slack. So there's just a Google form that you fill out just to make sure they vaguely know who you are. And that is a really amazing resource, I think, especially for the type of work that you're doing, documenting the war in Ukraine, getting feedback from that community and potentially even support. There's a big demonstration in Glasgow last year. I don't know if this made international news, but it happened on Kinnear Street, where the UK government sent immigration, border control, police. I didn't mean to do that red mark. Not sure how I managed that. Anyway, it happened very quickly, and the people who actually lived on that street literally threw themselves under the van to prevent these members of the community from being detained. And there's sort of a stalemate between immigration, sort of police force, and the members of that neighborhood where I used to live for hours and hours. And quite a lot of the activity and what was happening was on Twitter. And I just didn't have a way of collecting it and saving it somewhere quickly enough. So I got on that Doc the Now Slack, explained the situation, and Doc the Now just captured it for me. And they have a copy of that data for the day of the demonstration and a few days after. So definitely use that resource. And then the Web Recorder community, the Web Recorder tools, archiveweb.page was only launched February 2021. So it's still in development. They still are actively sort of asking for feedback from the community. And they also have a discourse forum through their website. So definitely get in touch with others doing this. Oop, have I left the... Right, so those are my core slides. I have a few more slides if people are interested in looking at the functionality of Web Recorder or looking a bit closer at tags for harvesting Twitter data. But that's the overview. So I'm happy to take questions now, or if people prefer, I can do a bit more of a deep dive into those tools.
Yeah, I would say it's probably mostly a question for Teresa and for Bogdan. So I will actually let them to make the choices here.
But I think we can proceed, and afterward we will we'll ask our questions.
Okay, so I'll look at the tools. Cool. Okay. Am I in the right window? Yeah. So Web Recorder, as I mentioned, part of a tool set created by the Web Recorder project. And the capture tool is archiveweb.page. And the main way that tool works is a Chrome extension. So that allows you to visit a social media page, you know, again, on your browser. So maybe not necessarily the natural habitat for all social media. But so from your Chrome browser, you install the extension and capture and archive that content as you browse as a user. So the sort of downside of using a tool like archiveweb.page that's manual is that you do have to click every play button and click every link in order to get it to capture that content. But it does have sort of beta autopilot functionality that works really well on Instagram and other really regular formatted platforms. But not really on anything else. But it's worth playing around with. So the other really useful thing about the web recorder tools is they are very well documented. The user guides are very good and will take you step by step through the process. And just a little bit to compare, because I know I've talked about crawlers and I've talked about a web recorder. So if you're not familiar with web archiving technologies, I just want to give a quick comparison so you understand what web recorder is and how it works. So crawlers, like what the UK Web Archive uses and the Internet Archive, are automated. So they are built to capture a very high volume of what they call seed URLs. So it goes out and it downloads all of that content, and all you have to give it are a list of URLs and tell it, how many hops away from that original URL you want it to capture. However, this means it typically contains really minimal metadata. So it keeps metadata about its own activities and the logs, but it doesn't really know anything more about the websites that it's capturing than sort of its underlying code and files. Also, it doesn't work very well with AV content, and it definitely doesn't work with interactive content that requires a user to actually input data or call request information or responses from an underlying database. It was developed at a time when most websites were quite flat and quite basic. And most crawlers, like Heritrix, which is sort of one of the original crawlers and still used, requires IT configuration and institutional infrastructure. It's not going to be that easy to set this up on your laptop. So web recorder is the opposite in basically all ways. So it is a manual tool, which does mean it is more labor intensive. So it's more effective for just a small number of URLs or a very contained resource. But it supports really close analysis and more detailed metadata. So you're going to get what archivists would call a more authentic version of that web resource. So it really excels at capturing high fidelity copies of AV content, of dynamic web pages. And it's also been built to be very easy to use for non-experts. So that's web recorder. I'm just curious, has anyone used, I can see there are things in the chat. Has anyone used archiveweb.page, or there's some familiarity with it? Okay. Yeah, so I would definitely recommend downloading the extension and just having a bit of practice. The user guide is very much set up for someone who just heard of it yesterday to come spend an afternoon and read through and play with it. If we do have a bit more time, I'm happy to just sort of show you and do sort of a couple of test pages. But for API harvesting, so tags, which I'm really focusing on for similar reason to web recorder, in that you can hear about it for the first time and then go away, spend a few hours, and as long as you have some basic computing skills like opening a spreadsheet, you should be able to use it. And again, if you have problems, the developer, Martin Hoxie, who's also based at the University of Edinburgh, complete coincidence, is really responsive and great for providing support. So API harvesting, if you're not familiar, an API is an application programming interface. That's basically a backdoor to the platform. So it's the platform sort of opening up and letting you have the data that it's holding. So it allows you to harvest that data in a machine readable form. So Twitter and other APIs tend to provide it in JSON, but you might also be able to get XML. And this means you get really rich metadata. But this is only available on certain platforms. The data that you harvest with an API is almost always licensed under terms of service that limits how you can share it. And this means it also supports linking data sets from different sources. So if you have certain values that are also in a different data set. So for example, the Social Science Data Lab at the University of Cardiff uses a lot of Twitter data in researching cybercrime. They often will combine Twitter data sets with police data sets, sort of using that ability to link data about places and networks, which means as a result, you have much more complex personal data issues. So this is not an exhaustive list, but just a look at some of the platforms that provide an API where you can do this type of harvesting. I've put little gray lines around Telegram because I don't know that much about what you can actually get with their API. And I don't think you're going to have access to encrypted sort of conversations, but perhaps one of you knows more about it. I'd love to know more. And so when I say you're getting this machine readable data, so what you would see on your phone or on your browser for Twitter data is a tweet in the Twitter interface as it has morphed and evolved over the years. And behind it is this JSON data, and that is what you're actually getting from the API. And this, I think you can see the first 26 lines is actually probably about 130 lines. So that's what I mean by lots of rich metadata. And it's worth, especially when you're thinking about ethical issues and privacy, it's just because you take away an account name doesn't mean that you're necessarily protecting people or reducing the risk of harm, because you may have a combination of other very unique data that makes it easy to find who somebody is. So for example, if you have, if somebody has listed their location and you can find an exact number of tweets that account has tweeted, or the exact number of followers that they have, all of those things combined can narrow it down and make it possible to find individuals. So the Twitter terms and conditions, as a rule, prevent resharing, but there is an exception in IF2BI for specifically non-commercial research. If you want to know a little bit more about how Twitter terms and conditions work and other platform conditions, my go-to place is Justin Littman, who was one of the original developers of Social Feed Manager. If you haven't reached out to him, he actually might be a really great person to speak to. He's at Stanford now. But there's a fantastic Medium article about this issue. But this exception for non-commercial research didn't exist until Justin and his team literally advocated for it. So this is, I think, a great, one of the rare sort of wins for the archiving community, where actually voicing, how restrictions are preventing, documenting these really important events and supporting research have actually led to a change in terms and conditions. But again, Twitter is already, I have a hate-love relationship with Twitter. So I'm not saying that they're perfect or that they are great supporters of research, but they are a lot better than some platforms. If you're interested in sort of a methodology for doing an ethical sort of decision-making, this is specifically for Twitter, but I think it can probably be used for lots of different types of social media. So it's the risk assessment flowchart created by the group I just mentioned at Cardiff, who do research around cyberbullying and cybercrime. This is their decision tree, and you can find it at that DOI in the article cited there. But they also have lots of other great resources around ethics for archiving social media in a way that is supports research and sort of research requirements for ethical use of data. So tags looks like this. So if you go to tags.hoxie.info and download the most recent version of tags, and just 6.0 and 6.1 at the moment, I definitely recommend having a look at the tags user guide first, because sometimes Google gets a little bit fussy about downloading tags and throws up a lot of sort of security alerts. But it's fine. I've been using it for years and years, not had any problems. So once you reassure Google that you do in fact mean to download tags, you get this copy of tags. And this is what it looks like. So you're able to set the parameters around your harvest. It will be necessarily restricted by Twitter's API restrictions. So Twitter's open API only allows you to collect a certain number of tweets back into the past. What I always recommend is not to wait to archive from Twitter. As soon as you know a relevant hashtag or account, you should start archiving it immediately. So like I said, you can either run now and in a hashtag or an account and just go capture your data, or you can set it to on a recurring trigger so that it will go collect every hour. And then this is what you get. So this is an example for a harvest of hashtag World Digital Preservation Day, WDPD 2019. So it exports or sort of displays all of that JSON data into a spreadsheet. So it's very straightforward. It doesn't have any analytical tools attached to it. It just gives you the data, but it's quite straightforward to get started with. So that's my closer look at Web Recorder and tags. Oh, thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. Maybe, yeah, super. You can stop sharing, but I should leave the recording on, right? We also want to hear the questions. Super.
Oh,
okay.
I meant to say that I know there are lots and lots of links in my slides, so I'm happy to share these afterwards if people want some of those links.
Super, thank you. Yeah, then I'll maybe give the mic to Taras and Bogdan and they can ask the questions.
Thank you, Sara. Thank you so much for this wonderful overview of methodology and tools in social media archiving. One of my first question was about asking you to share your presentation with us afterward. As I was constantly making screenshots during your presentation and taking notes. Although some of the tools or websites I'm familiar with, but there was still a lot of very interesting and potentially very useful hints for our project as well. And I was actually, while listening to your presentation, to the overview of the questions that should be asked at the beginning of such a project and the workflow, how it should look like in a normal situation, but also as a responsive archiving. And I was just constantly asking myself, how did we do with our project? Just trying to align or to meet your workflow, and I'm a bit relieved that we didn't do it totally wrong. As I mentioned, we have no previous experience in social media archiving, so it was completely new for us. But at the same time, I can see that at least we asked ourselves about the scope. At least we checked other similar projects elsewhere. We contacted initiatives that work on in the field. We contacted International Internet Preservation Consortium, Saving Ukrainian Culture Heritage Online. It actually started also with the contact to Niels Brugger, who will be another speaker in this workshop series in 2 weeks. So there were things that we tried to do the right way. And I also, it was really interesting to see this comparison between archiving workflow in a normal situation and archiving workflow as the responsive initiative. And I can clearly see that our project rather closer to this responsive archiving workflow, and we actually called this Telegram archiving as emergency archiving that we start. Basically, we use the word emergency because the idea was to capture something that could be deleted or gone very quickly. And but at the same time, I can see that there are situations where we had to make a decision, what should be archived and what should be not, in what format, what tools should be used. We checked as well Web Recorder. We checked, we also received an opportunity to use Archive-It crawler as well, but it's more convenient for web archiving and less convenient for social media archiving. So we tried several tools, and I maybe can give a short context of the Telegram, because it also allows you to export the content, the data from the platform itself. There is this feature built in the platform itself, so you basically can download content from the Telegram, not only from the account that is your personal own account, but also from basically any public. Not only public, actually, you can basically download any content from any channel or chat, because there is this differentiation between channel where you have an administrator publishing some content to the audience, and there is a chat where people just communicate with each other on a horizontal level. And you basically can download all of this kind of content. And technically, it's pretty easy. You just decide the time frame and click save. But you can also choose the between two formats. There is JSON and there is HTML, machine readable and human readable formats. And this will be also one of my questions about that. But in general, since you can technically download anything from Telegram, you have to make a decision what actually you want to download and what would be ethically, legally, methodologically right to download, and how to comprehend with all the privacy issues, security issues, personal identifiable information that is available there. And we have this discussion, internal discussion. I always also ask colleagues about that, and I use any opportunity to ask about this definition of private and public. Because for us, this is something that we basically need to decide, because there is no any restriction or limitation set by Telegram, or I don't know, even legal jurisdiction here is not so clear about that. So basically, one of my questions would be, how would you define, or how do you define for your projects, for yourself, what content published on social media is public and what is private? Because you also mentioned that Twitter has this difference that you probably from Facebook, for instance, that Twitter allows you to publish and you consider everything that is published there as public by default. At the same time, Facebook is more considered as the private communication tool, and people do not expect to see their content and as something that is public. But at the same time, in Telegram, you have channels and you have chats that are available to anyone. And people, I do not have to, we, obviously in our project, I should also say, we do not collect any private chats. For instance, I don't know, if there is a private chat of group of 5 people that communicate with each other on some private topics, we do not collect this. We only collect material that is publicly available without a need to register somehow. So you basically can see it and it is considered as open. But still, we have a lot of questions to that as well. So what is your take on private and public? It would be really interesting to hear some comments on that. And there is also another question slightly related to that. Is there something, for instance, in the project that you mentioned about archiving COVID-19 topic, is there any content, is there any parts of content or parts of metadata that you decide yet you do not archive, that it's not something that you would like to collect and preserve? And how do you make this decision? What conditions should be met in order for something to be archived, or an opposite, that you do not want to archive it? And also whether you have, or maybe you have some experience with the archival collections or parts of the collections that you had to delete or withdraw from the archive afterward, after it was preserved. by your own decision, but also by a decision of someone who is somehow affected by this archive, either as an author of the content or someone who is mentioned in this content? Do you have some, did you have such cases in the past, in your experience, where you basically either need to ask consent or you receive a request from someone to withdraw the material? And the third part about your project and your experience is also slightly related to the question that Bogdan mentioned in the beginning. How would you make it accessible? What are the strategies to make the archival collection that you captured, stored, and preserved? How would you make them accessible for the audience that you define from the beginning of the project? Yeah, what are the strategies? What are the, I don't know, software tools that you use for that as well? Are there any, I don't know, kind of follow-up events or follow-up initiatives to promote material or to show some use cases? How the archival content was used by someone in their own projects? Do you have any examples of that? So yeah, probably this would be like topics that I would like to ask you about. And just a small technical question at the end about this JSON and HTML formats from the Telegram, because you also mentioned that about the Twitter archiving methodology, that you can download your own accounts, data from your own accounts as a JSON format, and it's huge amount of metadata that allows you to work with that. And I just want to ask, because we made this decision what type of format we choose for collecting the material for the Telegram, and we decided to store HTML, so human readable content, and we have a lot of content at the moment stored like that, like several hundreds of Telegram channels and chats are collected as HTML files. We did this with the idea that we can also convert this HTML format into work format eventually, WARC. This is possible, so we decided to, in case we would need something else, then we can also convert it. But at the same time, I'm still hesitating whether it was the right decision. Maybe JSON machine readable format would be more, I don't know, rich in metadata and more convenient to use afterward in the future. And maybe, I don't know, maybe as you mentioned in the workflow, that sometimes you need to recapture after reviewing the content, you need to recapture it. And maybe this is the moment when we can also review our decision on the format and collect JSON as well. Just maybe have some comments on that. Of course, it's something that we should decide on our side, but I would be happy to hear a comment on that as well. Thank you.
Yeah, I think I've got all of those, but I'll definitely check in that I'm addressing all of those. Will I start at the end and go backwards, or no? Let's start with so you started with asking about deciding how we made curatorial decisions about what parts of social media to archive. You mentioned that Telegram doesn't really have a definition of what it considers to be private versus public, or a definition of what it says you can do with data that's private or public, and that there's not really any clear legislation. I'll say it's the same here. We don't have any legislative guidance, and we kind of have the legal terms and conditions of the platforms themselves, and then sort of, you know, our best effort as a community to have shared ideas about ethical approaches that go beyond those legal restrictions. But it's increasingly, I think, not just in the UK, but in continental Europe as well. So for instance, I was at an event on social media archiving in social science research. There were several archivists there from Germany, and they kind of disregard a lot of Twitter's terms of use because they feel that their national legislation and their remit as a collecting institution supersedes, you know, these licenses that Twitter's legal team sort of have decided are the rules. So even that's up for question. So I'd say what's more important is to understand what risks people are at who are represented in that data and trying to mitigate those risks. In terms of, you know, scoping within or out of a collection for us, so for the Collecting COVID initiative, so the social media that was submitted through that form, so from our sort of open call, were really small specific things. So there's someone who had, they'd written a poem, but in tweets, and they'd included the URL for each of those individual tweets. All we have captured using Web Recorder are just those tweets. So we don't see replies. We can't see the account names of anyone who has liked or retweeted, but we decided that is how most users interested in that work would want to approach it, and that we didn't need to take on this extra risk of the personal information of these other users who had retweeted it by taking in that data as well. I think, so you sort of touched on this, user expectations. It can help to know if there is any data. So in the UK, an organization called NatSen, I'm trying to remember who they've worked with. They definitely work with the UK Data Service, have done a lot of user surveys to get an idea from the general public whether they understand the sort of regulations around their social media and how they feel about their tweets or Facebook or whatever being archived and how they feel about it being reused in research. Obviously, that's not really perfect, and it's certainly not legally binding, but it can be useful. So I know in the UK, most users, social media users, like more than half, are aware that there are sort of terms of use around their tweets, and they are also aware that their data is reused by companies and sort of sold by media platforms. And most users, more than half, are actually happy for their data to be used in research. So I don't really know if you can sort of say that attitudes in the UK are going to be the same as in Ukraine or anywhere else. But if that's at all reassuring. So the other thing to consider when you're deciding what format, whether you're going to collect something machine readable or not, is how that data can be linked. So, and what the relative value of providing it in machine readable form versus not. So, for example, I'd say to support computational analysis, you are going to need to collect the JSON, the machine readable data. Similarly, if you are collecting a huge volume of data, you really need it in machine readable format so that it can be searched, and so that you can really do any kind of curatorial work with it, create sort of derivative data sets and things. It can be helpful though for small data as well. So you'd asked about sort of future access. So I have not personally been involved in this, but there are institutions like the UK National Archives who have a government Twitter archive who have built their own local pseudo Twitter. So it's an interface that kind of looks like Twitter, and that is how they make government only Twitter accessible. They have something similar for YouTube. They're only able to redisplay Twitter data through that interface because they collect the JSON. So if you don't have the underlying JSON, you're probably not going to be able to redisplay in a bespoke interface like that. But how likely are you to build a bespoke Telegram interface? So it's all, you kind of are keeping the door open by, keeping the JSON as well, but, considering that comes with a lot more risk, and because it's easier to identify individuals, it's easier to link that data and identify individuals, that's like, the decision that you have to make. For other social media and web archiving that we do, I'm going to kind of hide behind the collecting remit here. But the main thing that we collect for is for the corporate record. And that makes it quite simple because we are keeping a record of what the university has said. So we do not collect responses. Websites are simpler, social media is a bit more complicated, but we would aim to only make available where possible outgoing posts and communication from the university and not incoming. That said, if you're collecting from an API, that can be very challenging. So Social Feed Manager is actually, this is one of the amazing things about that tool, is it allows you to curate your data. I'm not going to help you with Telegram, but it can be very challenging to isolate specific tags within the JSON to delete. So I would say there's definitely an argument for collecting both, where you have the HTML version that's kind of your general public access. It's a bit safer to share. And then you have your JSON that you maybe sort of export into spreadsheets for restricted on-site access for people to come analyze. So I don't know if you have pre-existing sort of policies for that, but the University of Edinburgh, we provide restricted access to collection materials all the time. So we kind of have protocols in place for that. Right, I think I've covered the first two questions, kind of. I was going to say the golden standard is always to get in touch with creators and ask for their permission, with the understanding that this is rarely actually feasible. But I feel like to do due diligence, I have to say, if you are able, that's the best way. So for future access strategy for our own collections, we have not got very far, particularly with the collecting COVID materials. We don't have a precedent for this sort of crowdsourcing approach. So we've never really had to deal with some of the more complex rights issues that have come attached with some of these things. Because a lot of social media doesn't really have a clear-cut single creator, it's not really possible for that one person to give away all of the rights and permissions of everybody else that's represented. So probably for any social media that we collect that has those kind of, it represents personal information in some way, we would probably provide research access restricted on site. For the non-problematic stuff, we are currently building a locally hosted version of Web Recorder's replay.web. We're calling it replay.ed, Edinburgh. We are still in the process of building that, but that will allow us, when we have captured things using archiveweb.page, we can provide links directly to the replayed pages rather than trying to explain to people how to download a work file and upload it into a replayer. Yeah, and so like I said, any kind of more restricted data we have would still probably provide research access to it, but restricted on site. Because we don't fully have access sorted out, we have not really followed up with much promotion, but for other collections that we have, we certainly would promote it. So we're a university archive, so the main way we promote our collections is through teaching. So, actually getting involved on specific courses through sort of demonstrating how to access and use the collections that we hold. We have several different kind of training series where we might try and share with researchers, with students, how to interact with the archive, how to request things, how to use different types of materials. We very rarely make the news, but we do occasionally, typically just for the very old print things. Right, and that's the other thing, I have not done any testing, but I would definitely test converting HTML to work files and replaying them, because even different replayers can be a bit funny with work files that were not created by the same tool. So I would definitely test that to make sure you're happy with the results. And absolutely, this is that like review QA. So even in a responsive situation, it's just a necessary evil because there's not a perfect way of doing this. So no definitive answers there, but I hope that was helpful.
Yeah, thank you. We actually tried to test it, and it worked, but it was like on the small amount of data and only for one case. And I still a bit worried about that. And just a small follow-up question on the protocols, because you mentioned that you have protocols of restricted access on site. Is this something that is internal documentation, or is also publicly available to get familiarized with? How does those protocols work at your university?
Mm-hmm. I'm not sure. We probably do have some external stuff, documentation, so that visitors to the archive know what to expect. We will definitely have internal documents, and I don't see why I couldn't share those, but I will look into that. There are also institutions that have much more sophisticated restricted access protocols around social media, like GESIS, like the UK Data Service, that I'm happy to sort of point you to as well, if that's helpful.
Yeah, that would be great. Thank you.
I also have a question, if I may, on educational usages. Do you actually teach students how do you work with these archival data and web archiving and so on? And do you have some projects of involving with communities? So what I'm specifically interested, how do you make like tasks for students, go and archive whatever, something, personal story or Mykola Bachortek's webpage, whatever. Do this, and do you have maybe then some already developed accounts on this archiving epistemology? So we as historians normally work with kind of traditional epistemology. What is archive? What is document? Deep reading, like all the other things. And then here, when you have like JSON and machine reading and so on, then who is the researcher finally? How do you teach this? Who gets the answer?
Yes. Okay. So the two-parter there. So the extent of the training I've done with students and with other staff is kind of similar to what I did here, where it's an overview, because one of the biggest barriers to using social media archives is that people it's never occurred to them that we might be archiving social media or websites even. So the first hurdle is to get them comfortable with this idea that we are archiving them. I tend to keep it quite simple. So for web archives, the UK Web Archive has a web-based analysis tool called Trends. It's part of a tool set called Shine, which allows you to do really simple searches. So they're open. This is fairly complicated. They have an open data set of the UK web from 1998 until 2013. So it's not everything, because not all of that is open, but for data analysis, it's that data set. And this trends tool sits on top of that data set. So you can do things like search for Brexit, and you can see the spike of the use of the term, or Brexit might not be a great example, it's too late. Any cats or dogs or a football team or World Cup, and you can actually visualize sort of spikes of uses of those terms. And then it will also give you a list of all of the records of archive web pages where that term was used, if you want to sort of follow up and see. So for example, I'm trying to remember what I did use something to do with the European Union in a recent demo. Now I can't remember the exact term. But not surprisingly, the vast majority of those pages that were returned in that search were news outlets. Whereas if you search for you know, a certain type of art genre, most of those hits are going to be museums or galleries. I'm sort of guessing here. So it's a very basic, are really only to get students started thinking about what you might be able to do with that data. Not really useful for researchers with highly developed computational analysis skills. There are good resources out there that I can point you to. I don't know if you're familiar with the Archives Unlocked project. So they tend to have tutorials and methods for working with works, so doing data analysis on works. But there are similar sort of methods, tutorials for social media as well. But we have not started teaching those from the archive. There are schools and colleges, so like the School of Social Sciences and Informatics will have their own curriculum to teach these methods, but they'll be based on researchers capturing their own stuff, not using archival materials. So we're still very much at the beginning of this journey. But yeah, happy, I don't know if that's really helps too much, but I'm happy to point you in the direction of those other sort of tutorials and links and support.
That's it from Bogdan and Taras. Yes. Mikola, do you have any questions?
I guess we can open the floor, to the general questions. I definitely having a lot, but I would wait for a minute without kind of jumping with my questions. So okay. Let's first see if others might have questions too.
All right, does anyone have any question for Sara? You can just turn on your video or just unmute yourself and ask.
So Mikola, go ahead.
Yeah, perfect. Then I will go forward. And then probably people would have some questions incoming. So first of all, really thank you so much for the fabulous talk, Sara. I enjoyed it so much. Such a great points and also such a great ideas of the tools. I really have plenty of questions, but let me probably start with two most pressuring ones. My first question is about mobile devices and apps. Can you maybe guide us slightly into this direction? So do you know some archival projects which are actually trying to do something with archiving what is going on the mobile devices and also in the application, so not in the browsers? Because it's something that we're really interested very much with some other colleagues, because we know that so many communication and so many data is actually consumed these days on the mobile devices, but somehow I still have a feeling that we're very much still focusing on the desktop devices. And my second question is about legal issues, which you already touched quite a bit, and also something that Taras was asking. I specifically was interested about the legal issues in relation to the Internet Web Archive, because I heard that they had some problems with basically some of the websites that they were archiving, and that owners were actually coming to them and then expressing discontent of the content being archived. Can you tell maybe a bit more about those ones and how do you generally would think about the solutions in such cases? Thanks a lot.
Right. Okay. So mobile devices and apps. I don't have a huge amount of experience in this. I've actually the only experience I have of testing sort of content on mobile devices is emulators for mobile devices on desktops, which might kind of be a way forward for what you preserve and access. But this is just in a testing sort of environment. I think I do know a handful of people, but I don't want to promise anything without following up. But I know that this is of interest in other institutions. I don't know how much progress has been made, but I'm happy to follow up. I know sort of in emulation, but oh, sorry, but we did have a comment from.
My name, sorry, I have no camera here in the office. My name is Judith Jonin. I'm from University of Bern, but actually I'm an engineer in agriculture science, and I was working for different mobile companies in Switzerland, Orange, Swisscom, and this kind of stuff. And I know how to do it. Actually, in the moment, it's still like this. To each mobile, now we have same chargers, but you have a data cable and charger normally. Before, I have also home a collection of different cables and chargers and a car adapter to this. So when you have these data cables and the different chargers, you can connect your phone to any device, a computer, whatever you have, tablets, it doesn't matter if it's a Mac or a PC, and then you can download your phone and store it on the device. So important is all the time, once you get a new phone, keep all of the cables you get with, because now it's easier, you get only 2 different cables, data cables and chargers, fast chargers, whatever. So this is the one you need to keep, put it just on a computer, and then you can download everything, all the pictures, all the message from WhatsApp, all this, like a backup actually. This is the easiest thing to do now, actually. In the case, as me, I know I'm not so familiar with storage of what you talked about, so that's why I'm not responsible for the whole university here, but just also the secretary from the student leader, my boss, she is the one we do all the whole study timetables, exams, and all things for the whole Department of Social Sciences, included the Institute of Sociology, Institute of the oldest here in Bern, the Institute of Political Science, and the Institute of Mass Media and Communication Science. Yeah, so.
Are you able to, so when you get the data off of a phone, so yes. I've used a data cable just to get sort of photos off of a phone, but can you get the actual apps themselves so that you can replay?
Yes, you can do too, but you need to download for each phone. See, is it a Samsung, is it a Sony, as me I use just in a moment, is it a iPhone or whatever, you need to download the app for it. Even you want to transfer from an old phone to the other. Actually, it's the same system. Then you can download the app and also all the apps, like you put it on your device, and then from this you can put it on any other new phone you want to have. You can just also update it from time to time that you don't lose something like a backup. Do you understand what I mean? So the whole apps are inside too, but then each app you will download again on the new phone, because otherwise it's too big, the data or the apps. Because nowadays you have so many apps on a phone that's actually a computer itself now. So that's why it's faster and better and more intelligent to download. Then you see all the apps you have, and then you can download them again on the new phone actually. And then the data will be just transferred, and then the passwords, whatever, is already on the new phone.
Right. So I was just thinking of if there was ever a situation where someone might donate an entire phone to the archive, they probably would not want to know that all of their passwords are
No, but actually then you have to think on it also to the passwords delete if you want to send something to someone else. I mean, then it's up to the user again from the data cable and the phone. When you put your phone on another new phone, you need it, no? Otherwise, I don't know if you don't know by heart all the passwords to each side, but otherwise you need it. But so this is important also to think about once you want to send something from your phone or a device that you don't put him also all the passwords. So yeah.
Yeah, I think Nicola, that's right. Because I'm thinking just of backwards compatibility. There's so much data you won't be able to open in a new version, probably even after a few years.
I have them home from few years and many years, as I really have my old phones and stuff that don't exist anymore. They're not sold anymore. So I can still connect them and download them on the computer and reuse them again.
Nope, that's a good tip. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
So there you go. There's your answer, mobile devices and apps. The only other thing I would add in terms of institutional archiving is similar to proprietary software. A lot of these apps have really strict copyright around them, depending on who's created them. So unofficially, quite a lot of institutions will take copies of these apps or software quietly. I'm just remembering I'm being recorded. I didn't name any names. And it's the same with video games, with games. It's in a bit of a deadlock where there are ways of saving the software, but dealing with proprietary software can be really tricky. I kind of feel like as archives, we can play the waiting game. It's like our archive is hundreds of years old. Is Microsoft really going to care about this in 200 years? Probably not, if they even exist. I don't want to wait that long to make this material accessible, but we at least have that. Your second question about the Internet Archive. I don't work for the Internet Archive, so I wouldn't want to speak definitively. I can say that they exist in a bit of a legal gray area, and they are not legal deposit. They don't have legal mandate from the government to archive even the US web, but they operate with a very generous or liberal takedown policy. So if somebody asks them to take something down, they will. But I do just want to say that there's a difference between suppressing access to something and deleting it. So just because someone has asked them to take something down and you can't find it anymore, it doesn't mean they don't have it. In fact, it can be quite complicated because of how they structure their works to go find a specific page and delete it. But it's much simpler to suppress that exact URL from their replayers. But they would be able to obviously talk in a lot more detail about that.
I just would like to to say actually I'm working where Mikola is working, but much longer, 10 years already than him. And actually we have our servers here, our own server part for our institutes, also for the whole department. We're about 200 people working for this department. And actually we have our license also from the IT. So we are able, and this is a legal way, to download and store and back up actually our computers with our license. They got them, and this is legal actually. But what governments are doing, you know, especially US or other governments I don't want to mention, they just do what they want. No, even Switzerland too. Yeah.
Do we have other questions? Because I definitely have more questions and comments. So. Okay, then I guess I will kind of keep bothering Sara because I really find it so interesting.
Sorry, one question I have actually is about the storage method. And as I know, I studied about it and I found out that actually the microfilm was one of the best way to storage for years and years. So the CDs, even you can also first freeze in, then it's better. Then you can try to scratch on it. It doesn't matter so much. But before, yes. So actually they're different. Yeah, you have servers for sure that need all the time energy, even if solar, whatever energy, but you need energy and a lot. So actually, what are the devices otherwise you are using in Edinburgh to storage your datas, even social media, whatever datas?
We're not using microfilm, but yes, I've read that as well. We've not, I think maybe the access issue is probably the reason why. We keep one preservation copy in a DSpace repository, so on disk. So that's the copy we use for reference if we're doing a health check on our apes, on our preservation copies. That's what we would use, are those DSpace copies. And we keep duplicate copies on tape. So our tapes are managed by IBM's Tivoli Storage Manager. And we keep those tapes. They're both in Edinburgh, which is not great practice. We should see about our friends at the University of Glasgow, maybe will hold one for us. But they are in different locations on the campus. So yeah, 2 copies on tape and 1 on disk.
Okay, thank you very much. So we have also IBM in Switzerland and storage possibilities, but thanks a lot.
Can I then probably just go for a follow on this question now, Sara? Can you also tell us a bit about the challenges of the long-term preservation of the digital data and specifically social media data? So what would you say are really the things to keep in mind when thinking about, indeed, let's say, the reuse of the social media data, which is archived in, let's say, 10 years from now? So what you would actually recommend to kind of keep in mind when thinking about those possible challenges?
I think that needs another 45-minute presentation. So literally, I think good backup, good storage and backup. You do need to have a separate preservation strategy for archival content. So I think a lot of people don't realize that network storage and even with cloud storage has a backup regime that deletes all the backups after sort of 2 months or 3 months. So if you discover that something has been damaged or deleted after 3 months and 1 day, then you might not be able, or it might not be easy to recover that. So this bit preservation, keeping multiple copies in specific preservation storage on different types of storage media, so that if one type of storage fails, you have something else. Refreshing your storage, having some idea of what the lifespan is of your storage media. So on servers, we would probably want to start thinking about refreshing after sort of 5 to 7 years. Preservation storage doesn't get used a lot, so it may get a longer lifespan than something that's got sort of hot storage or currently used records stored there. So literally speaking, you know, good storage, doing your integrity checks, assigning checksums, regularly checking to make sure your data hasn't been damaged, hasn't been lost. But I think actually the biggest risk is that a lot of the knowledge about collections, what they are, why it was collected, is kind of just in the heads of staff. And there's such a high turnover of staff, well, at our institution anyway. But I think a big risk is the loss of knowledge and the loss of like knowing that we even have something. So I think getting things documented and like really advocating for adequate staffing and resource, and because documentation takes a lot of work. So that's That's what I would say. Yes, absolutely.
I could say we have just not literature, but also a law in Switzerland that tells us and force all the mobile devices. It doesn't matter if it's email, if it's phone calls, SMS, whatever. The phone itself, they don't record it, but I'm not sure about it anyway. I think they do it even though Switzerland, I mean, we have also how to say the spy from Switzerland and this, but all the mobile devices like Swisscom, all this, they have actually stored in servers. They are high security with thick beton walls that actually even you put a bomb on it is not really damaged, and backups of them also again. And it's very costly because this is not so small. I know here in Bern where it is actually, and this is high, really high protected walls, their securities, whatever. I think even from satellite, you look whatever happened to it. Yeah, and actually it is not the Swisscom wanted this, so, but it's the people, they actually said yes to a police law some years ago, after we had a big problem of fish affairs in Switzerland. As you heard in the phone when you were talking, a click, and then you knew someone else is listening and make whatever notice what you say and then click out again. So this one was making big storage, but the people, they were not well informed when the new police law just a little bit later, 1-2 years later came, and they accepted this. But they didn't really read it, the most of it, like all the times. It's again too much data. People don't like to read so much sometimes. And then I accepted this shit law. Sorry, for me, it's really like this. We are so much observed here and everything. That is really just, yeah, we have actually, freedom or liberty, but it's not so much like the people think it is, or they feel the most of it. So this we have already, the storage bunkers with actually servers, and for sure also generators in case that the electricity is going down. Everything is already done, and we use them since years already. Just to say, it's already done here in Switzerland for years. Yeah. For example, also university, we have bunkers here for books and everything, and also the servers are quite very sure here, even you send a bomb from somewhere.
Yeah, our servers at the University of Edinburgh would not survive a bomb. They would not survive probably like any kind of impact. I don't know how much of a target it would be though, but I agree with you. I think it can go too far in the other direction. Obviously data is useful if you're using that power for good, but it's a slippery slope. I would certainly agree with that. Definitely agree with Michaela's superpower of documentation. It is unbelievably useful as an archivist to discover really good documentation accompanying collections, especially if there's no way we will ever be able to find the original creator. But yeah. Bye, Anna, Stacia. Thank you for joining. I know we're sort of just 2 minutes from the hour. This has gone by very quickly. Maybe quickly for me because I was doing most of the talking, but this is really lovely. I really appreciate hearing more about your project. I would love to see how you get on with this Telegram archive.
Yes, thank you, Sarah. It was actually very productive. These 2 hours were quite quick, and a lot of information that we need to process afterward and go through the notes that we made. It actually was very productive and useful for us. So I just want to thank you again for this wonderful presentation.
I also made print screens from your presentation, sorry. And now I'm going
I don't mind. I wish I had said at the beginning that I would share the slides so you didn't.
Now I'm going to check all those websites and instruments that you mentioned, and at least to learn more about this. Thank you.
My pleasure.
Mikola, anything you want to say? It was amazing, Sarah. Thank you so much. It was really, really, really good. And I think we will be using this for the future as well. So not only for today and attendees who were present today, but people can also benefit from this in the future as well. So thank you so much for taking the time.
Yeah, I just wanted to chime in and kind of also thank Sara. I already texted Tani during the talk that I'm going really to share the record with my students because it's just so useful, and I'm constantly having questions from people whom I teach, okay, how I can actually get some data from Twitter for my small university project, what I'm doing this. So it was really fantastic, Sara. Thank you so much.
Great, glad to hear.
Good.
And I'm happy. My last slide has my email and my Twitter handle. I'm on Twitter far more often than I would like to admit. So you can definitely always get me on Twitter. Feel free to email me. Please stay in touch.
Good. Thank you. Thank you so much. And thank you to everybody who attended.
Thanks,
Bye.
everyone.
Thank you. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye. And thank you for organizing this.
Thanks very much. Bye-bye. Oh, the next time. On July. Okay.